Hey everyone, this is Deacon Andy. I am back with our third episode of Pius Presents. And today I am joined by Father Simeon Leiva. He is a Trappist monk and he's living in Rome. Now, I know a few of you might be wondering, how on earth did I get connected to this guy? Well, Father Simeon, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you became a monk?
How I became a monk. All right. I'll try to make it brief. As you can tell from my white hair, everything in my life has a long history, but I'll spare you that. Um, yes, well, Deacon Andy and I only met, about a month, just a little over a month ago, while he was still here in Rome before the big outbreak of the coronavirus and the lockdown in Italy. Um, and then the next thing that I knew, I got a message from him from Lake Charles, Louisiana, that he was gone and all the seminarians were gone. And then soon after that, the whole NAC, 10 days later, I guess, the whole NAC was shut down and everybody went home. But I am here. Um, I am I am originally from Cuba, but I've lived in the United States most of my life, mostly in San Francisco, California. But in 2003, at the tender age of 56, I entered the monastery. And my monastery is St. Joseph's Abbey in Spencer, Massachusetts. I've been a monk since 2003, as I say. Now, in 2015, I was invited by the Abbot General of the Trappist order uh, to come to Rome to work as his personal secretary. And so I have been here in Rome, in the southern part of Rome, since 2015, so going on 6 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Father, what specifically about a monastic vocation do you find so attractive? How do you know that God has called you to this?
Yes, it's always a good question about any vocation, and really, as anything in human life, I don't think any one of us, unless you're a very privileged mystic, has a direct line of communication with God. Everything in human life happens through mediation, other people, circumstances, books, beatings of the heart. All kinds of events that happen. I've really been in love with monastic life since high school. Let's say since I first picked up a book by Thomas Merton, and I knew that was going to be that was it for me. It was one of those inevitable recognitions, really very much like falling in love. And you just know you can't prove it to anybody, and everybody else thinks you're quite crazy. And yet this is it. It's as obvious to you as the sun shining in the sky. Um, However, many things happened in my life, and I had quite a long career teaching in college. And for various reasons, I couldn't realize my dream to become a monk until, as I say, age 56. And so my case is not typical. Not most people enter, not at 20 or 22 anymore, but most people enter these days monastic life anywhere between above 30, let's say on the other side of 30 or even 40, sometimes even a little bit later. Um, and in my case, the curious thing was that attraction to monastic life that I first picked up from Merton, I didn't even know what a monastery was before I read Merton's books. Over the decades, really, from age like 14 or 15, right up until age 56 when I entered the monastery, no matter what else I had done. And I have children, I had a career, I had a very, very fulfilling life, yet that interior, it's like a magnet pulling you in a certain direction, and it goes through many variations according to where you are in your life. That never left me. And then at that age, I found myself, the children were grown, I didn't have other commitments, so I quit the university and decided to enter the monastery for that reason.
Wow, that is
Yeah.
amazing. So we've been in this situation now for a few weeks of being isolated in our homes and being away from other people. Do you find that people are kind of entering into a monastic mentality, or how do you make sense of what we're going through today as a monk?
Yeah, by hook or by crook, whether we like it or not, I guess we've all more or less, there was a book a few years ago, quite a few years ago, called The Monk Within. I don't know if you ever heard of that book, Andy, but The Monk Within, it functions on the premise that every human being in the center of the soul has a monastic type longing. I mean, becoming a monk in the flesh and wearing a habit and all this is one thing, but supposedly this expresses something that every human being, a deep desire for intimacy with God is really what it is. That's one way of describing it. Um, and I think that is not only an impulse, it's a need that human beings have. Something like the situation that we're living now. I mean, when people write and ask me, well, how are you doing? How are you doing? So, well, really, monks live an enclosed life anyway, so you could call it permanent quarantine or something like that. So that now it's really only a difference of degree, but not a difference in kind of life that we lead. And yet, emailing with people and exchanging views, it's amazing to me how much the human experience, when you're trying to live your life seriously and meaningfully, how much human experience is the same everywhere. It's really very similar to why one joins a monastery. It's a challenge to look at one's life and say, I mean, whether you like it or not, it's just forcing us all, monks or anybody, what are the principles that guide my life? What are the criteria by which I lead my normal life? Now that everything is shaken and I don't have as many distractions as before, still you take a long look at what you were just doing last month, we were all doing last month, and we're not doing now. And what reactions, for instance, this lacking this freedom of movement, not being able to go and pick up the metro here or have a cup of coffee up the road, what reaction does that do to me? Do I go into some kind of withdrawal from, little addictions that I cultivate in my life? And what do I do about that sense of crisis, that I have to decide what road am I going to take now to make sense of my life? And really, all of monastic life is always that way. A person enters a monastery in a sense, don't get me wrong, but in a sense, to live a life of crisis, by which I mean being challenged to look at oneself yet again and ask yourself, am I loving as much as I can? Am I really there for others? Am I paying attention to what people say to me? Am I listening to God? You see, these are the questions that come up that we try to avoid because they can be painful questions if the answers are negative, but that are the questions that really give us life, if you think about it.
You're right. As we're now in Holy Week, and we get to ask these questions to ourselves, and we can probably identify more and more with the apostles, as they're with Jesus, they're alone in many situations. What specifically about the apostles can we learn about loving the Lord during this time of crisis?
Well, the apostles, like all of us, regardless of what culture or when or where we live, they were human beings and sharing all of our same basic, our defects, our passions, our fears, our loneliness, our search for greater life, greater sense of life, but greater fullness of life, for unity and love with others and all of us together with God. And so we see that on every page of the gospel. But of course, the time of the Passion. We read this week the Gospels of the betrayal of Judas. Everyone asking, is it I, Lord? Is it I, Lord? Sense of anxiety, a sense of self-questioning Also, I think, Andy, the apostles' sense of a division within themselves. In other words, with their conscious self, with their will, they want to love the Lord. They've already followed him for 3 years. They want to die for him. And Simon Peter says, I will die for you, even if everybody else runs away. So a division, a real kind of serious gap between that ideal desire, and which is real, and yet the performance, which simply does not follow the ideal. And so it's hard living with one's own sense of incoherence. You feel like a hypocrite sometimes. And the apostles did too, and yet not knowing what to do about it. But all of that is just garden variety human living. We are creatures of the moment, and our heart is big and with big dreams and big desires, and yet give me a piece of chocolate, give me a good cigarette, and I'm ready to throw Christ overboard. I mean, that may be overstating it a little bit, but I don't think a whole lot, because of our sensuality, because of our attachment to things. Anyway, what to do about it? Well, look at Peter and look at Judas. There you have your choice. I don't think Judas was a greater sinner than Peter. They both betrayed the Lord, and they betrayed him big time because of fear, because of all sorts of things. In the end, even though I cannot control all of my reactions and emotions, and I can certainly not control what's happening in the world to make me anxious and afraid, there's one thing that I can control. I can decide what is going to have the greatest power over my soul. Is it going to be my fear of failure, my disgust with myself, my knowledge that I am mediocre? Am I going to give full power to those things? Because then I'm giving in to the biggest temptation of all. I mean, that's specifically satanic. When you buy into a logic that says, yeah, look at you pretending to be the big saint, you'll never be a saint. If you believe that and you buckle under, it's finished. True as my mediocrity and infidelity and all that might be, the other option is God's grace is always greater than my weakness and my sin. I can give that, God's grace and presence, supreme power over my soul, instead of empowering negative views of myself and of the world. And that's the difference between Peter and Judas. So
that's wonderful. Gosh, I'm feeling so good going into Triduum. Thank you so much for your insights.
You're welcome.
It has been great. Andy. It has been great to finally catch up with you again.
Good.
So
thank you. Thanks for the initiative.
Absolutely. If you're ever in the States, I hope you can come to Lake Charles. You have a place to stay here all the time. So
thanks very much. That's very kind of you. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, come on.
Good.
Well, thank you all for tuning in to Pius Presents, and we look forward to seeing you on another episode later on during our isolation. Take care.